series speaker. This is Maeghan Farnham, and we actually went to high school together, and I was like, oh, you know who would be a great person to have come talk to you guys about maybe a career that you didn't know about? Meg. Um, so Meg's kind of passion for the outdoors started when she went on a trip called Quest that we had at our middle school when she was in 8th grade. And then she ended up going to SUNY Plattsburgh for expeditionary studies and has been a guide and instructor kind of all over the place in the United States and in Chile. And now she works as an operations manager in Saranac Lake. So she's kind of here to talk to you guys about herself and her journey, and yeah. So I'm gonna let you take it away, Meg. Tell us a little bit about kind of yourself and how you got to where you are now.
Hi, yeah, I'm Megan. Nice to meet you all. um, yeah, so like Bree said, I kind of figured out that I liked doing things outside in 8th grade when I joined the Quest program, and then throughout high school, I acted as a student leader. Bree was one of my 8th graders, which was cool. We had known each other before then, but that was a lot of fun. Um, yeah, so I went to Jamestown Community College because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And the reason I found expeditionary studies was because my grandma travels quite a bit, and I kind of asked myself, what type of degree do the people who lead these trips that she goes on have? And so when I looked into essentially like adventure guiding or tourism degrees, I found the expeditionary studies program, and it was essentially that, but in a much more outdoor technical sense. And so it was a program that teaches you how to be an outdoor guide, essentially. And I thought that that sounded like a lot more fun, to be honest. So that's how I ended up with that degree. During that time, you have to choose a focus. My two major focuses were rock climbing and skiing. Um, and that includes like backcountry skiing as well. And then since then, I've pretty much exclusively worked in the paddle sports industry, so like canoeing and kayaking, which is kind of funny. And so, yeah, like Bree said, after that, I spent time guiding. I guided over in Washington State in the San Juan Islands as a sea kayak guide. I worked in Massachusetts as a kayaking instructor. I was a trekking guide in Torres del Paine National Park in Chile, which was really cool. And then I moved over to Seattle, and I was working as a school programs manager for a company called Seattle Adventure Sports, which provides after school programs that are outdoor education based for like elementary school kids, and then also a summer camp that is paddling based off of Mercer Island. And then after that, I went to Eastern Washington University and got my master's degree in sports and recreation administration. And I took this job over in Saranac Lake because I knew that I liked this area because this is where I went to college, and it was a place that I kind of ultimately decided I wanted to be. And I also forgot to mention I've been working for SUNY Plattsburgh as an adjunct professor for expeditionary studies for like the past 6 years or so as well. Yeah, and that's how I got to where I am now, and now I'm running a canoe outfitter in Saranac Lake, so that's great.
So I want to give you guys the floor kind of and ask if you have any questions for Meg. Or nothing yet? Okay. Did you hear that?
Not totally, no.
Okay. Did you have to know how to speak Spanish when you're in Chile?
I had a little bit of Spanish background just because I took Spanish in high school and I studied abroad when I went to JCC in Costa Rica, so obviously I had to take Spanish there as well. Most of my clients in Chile actually were English speaking, so some of the Chilean companies do like to hire people who speak English, but that being said, knowing some Spanish obviously was very helpful because I still needed to navigate around the area. I needed to be able to talk to people who were working in the park to make sure I could get where I needed to be. So I'm not fluent in Spanish by any means, but I did need to know some Spanish, and I learned more Spanish when I was there, obviously. But I would recommend if anyone wants to become fluent in a language, you should absolutely do that because it will help you pretty much no matter what you decide to do.
So I have a question for you. What, like, out of all of the expeditions and everything that you've been on and led, what was your favorite?
Um, I I went on a trip. This wasn't work related, but I went on a trip to South Africa with one of my classmates. To graduate from the Expeditionary Studies program, you have to do what's called a senior expedition. So basically, you have to write a very, very, very long paper, planning your expedition, doing risk management, everything like that. And so I attended her senior expedition in South Africa, um, and we hiked in the Drakensberg Range, but unfortunately it didn't really go quite as we planned. So then we had to transition into a slightly different trip, which involved some more climbing and less hiking.
Awesome.
What are some skills that are make a person a good fit for that job, for those jobs?
So I would say something that's really important in the outdoor industry is just being able to think quickly, if that makes sense. Like, you really need to learn how to think in action. And that's not something that somebody necessarily knows how to do right away, but it's something that you certainly would want to develop before you start a job like this. Another one is the ability essentially to assess risk, which is another thing that's kind of hard to do until you are made to do it. Um, and another would be to just be able to remain calm in challenging and stressful situations. In terms of other more hard skills for the outdoor industry, obviously knowing how to camp is important. To be a guide, you need to be able to be hospitable. You need to be able to know what people need at any given time, because essentially when you're guiding, you're taking care of yourself outside, but you're also taking care of other people as well. You need to be able to anticipate their needs. You need to be able to assess how they're doing in any given situation, because sometimes people don't know if they're not doing well. So generally speaking, it's very heavy on people skills, but not in the same way as other jobs. I guess, if that makes sense.
So, what kind of advice do you have for maybe somebody who's interested in the outdoors but hasn't had a lot of experience out there?
Yeah, yeah, and so I mean, that's a huge barrier with this industry in general. It's really hard for people to access outdoor recreation. Like, it's easy in some ways in that it's readily available and there for you, but it's difficult in that it's hard to find somebody to help you do that and help you learn how to do it. Um, so it's hard to give too much advice just because it's really dependent on what area you are in. Um, but if you can find local programs that do provide like free resources for outdoors, that's a good way to go about it. I can't think of any specifically in the general Buffalo area, but I do know that they exist. Um, so if you can get yourself involved in like some sort of after school program, if that's offered to you, if sometimes like the YMCA has outdoor recreation based programs, doing things like encouraging your family to go to go camping. As funny as that seems, that it's hard because I know a lot of people's families don't necessarily want to go camping. But yeah, just using the resources locally that are available to you and just doing a little bit more research into what there is, would be a good move. The YMCA does seem to be one of the more prominent ones in most areas, though, that have outdoor rec programs.
Awesome.
She mentioned some of those important skills and personality traits to have. Are there examples of when those came into play, like a specific concrete time when, being able to think on your feet, being able to assess risk, like when you put that into action?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Certainly, and it really kind of depends on obviously it depends on what kind of trip you're on. I've guided adults, I've worked with large groups of children. The risks and the things you're doing are very different. So one thing that I tend to be good at is, like when I was working in Chile, I am kind of a good cultural translator for people who are from the US or Europe. So a lot of people who would come on these trips would be upset about things that didn't really matter, but they wanted somebody to understand their frustration. So, for example, we were at this campground that's literally in the middle of nowhere, and they have showers there, which is incredible when you think about it. It doesn't really make any sense when you look at where they're located. And I had people who were really upset that there were no hooks in the shower stalls to like hang their clothes on. And they were throwing a fit about this, and they were getting really upset at one of the Chilean guides. And each Chilean guide was like, I don't care at all about what you're saying to me right now, which was kind of funny. But I had to then talk to those people and be like, hey, so I understand why you're upset about this thing. I know that that's what you're used to, but that's not what is happening here. And that is not something that you are going to get here. So you really can't let that ruin your experience, because that is the cultural experience is part of this trip, and that's just something that you really need to embrace. And so that's something that I find myself having to do a lot, especially when it comes to guiding. In terms of assessing risk, especially when I worked in the San Juans, there's a lot of current and wind there. So when you're sea kayaking around, you need to be able to navigate that. There's also a lot of fog, and there's a shipping channel. So knowing how to use a radio, for example, to call into the Coast Guard is important. But I had to do a crossing through this very busy channel, both shipping and just general boat traffic. And I had a family with me, and kind of the way that you have to go about this particular crossing is it's almost like playing the game Frogger, which kind of ages me a little bit, but if anyone knows what Frogger is, you kind of go a little bit and then you have to wait. You can move forward a little bit, then you have to wait. And so we started our crossing, and then I could see a whale watching boat coming, and those boats are moving faster than you think they are, and there's ways to know whether or not they will hit you, which is a whole other thing to get into. But the dad in the family was insisting that we had to keep going, and I was like, no, we are not going to do that because we'll get hit by that boat. And he was like, well, I mean, it seems like it's going to be fine, so let's go. And I had to keep arguing with this man repeatedly to get him to not paddle in front of a whale watching boat. And so basically having to just be like, you can go ahead and do that if you'd like to. I'm going to sit back here with the rest of your family and not get injured. That's what my plan is. So a lot of it is also just being able to, while assessing risk, explain your risk assessment strategy to your clients. And I think that is that also plays a little bit into the gender role of being a woman in the outdoor industry. And I find myself having to explain my thought process a lot to my clients for them to understand and believe that I am making the right choice. So I guess those would be two slightly different examples.
Okay. Yeah.
What was the dumbest thing that someone done on one of your trips?
Ooh, the dumbest thing. I can't think of anything. That's not really so much the issue with these trips. It's, I mean, I can tell you the craziest thing that's ever happened on one of my trips. And it's that I had a family. Well, it was a mom and her two sons. Um, and on the first day of a 5-day trip, her son kind of freaked out and literally punched her in the face, which was crazy. Like, not not an easy thing to handle. And what it ended up being was whenever I start a trip, even if we have health forms that people have to figure out, I always ask them, "Are you on any medication that I should know about? Do you have any health conditions that I should know about that might affect this trip?" And what it ended up being was that her son was on medications for some, I don't remember what exactly it was, but some psychological disorder. And it was that he had recently just had a growth spurt and his dosage wasn't right. And I was like, that is something that would be relevant to share with me in this particular situation. And we were able to work it all out. But that would be certainly the craziest thing. And also just generally having a lot of people just really dive into their personal lives with me, things that I don't necessarily want to know or need to know. A lot. That happens a lot. Yeah.
Hi, Meg. My name is Mike, and I co-advise a club here, a fledgling club called Trojan Trekkers. We also were in partnership with the west side of town. And we've been noticing just, there's a lot of we're reading a lot in the news about, there's certain hiking incidents and a lot of people, especially take the White Mountains of New Hampshire, we've been noticing a lot of people are getting caught on the Franconia loop up there. And, either being unprepared or whatever. We're just seeing more and more and more of this. What would you attribute that to? A lot of more of these incidences happening. What would you attribute it to?
Honestly, I would attribute a lot of it to social media and people sharing trips and making them look easier than they are, whether that be intentional or not. I think that that's a huge factor. And I think that when you see somebody going and doing something that you want to do, your assumption is, well, they can do it, so why couldn't I do it? But there's a lot of maybe background knowledge that those people have that you're not aware of. And I think personally that it's very irresponsible for them not to share that they have whatever training they have or whatever background knowledge they have, or to share their story that got them to that point. So it's essentially just the way that they're perceiving risk is not accurate, and they don't have an understanding of that risk, and that can get you into trouble in really any situation, not just the outdoors. But that is very common. It happens a lot. It happens in the high peaks a lot over here. There's people getting rescued over here constantly because they just really want to get to the summit of Mount Marcy to take a cool picture of the summit of Mount Marcy, and then they realize that it's a 20-mile round trip hike and it's winter and they've never hiked in the winter before, and also they have to go up 3,000 feet of elevation gain, and then all of a sudden it's 9 p.m. because they decided to start at noon and they don't have a headlamp or any sort of flashlight or any extra food or anything to stay out overnight with, because they just don't. It's not really their fault. They just literally do not know what they don't know. It's unconscious incompetence, essentially. That's what it is.
You're a 46er?
I am not, no. I do hike high peaks, but I'm not a 46er.
Still awesome. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the scariest expedition you've been
The scariest expedition I've been on was also the coolest expedition I've been on, so also the South Africa trip. The reason it was the scariest was because the person whose senior expedition it was on, she brought the trail. If you look it up at some point, the Drakensberg Grand Traverse is a very it's a complicated trip, and there's no actual set trail for it. So essentially when you're doing it, you're following GPS coordinates. When we got over to South Africa, she did not, for whatever reason, calibrate her GPS. And so essentially it kept taking us off track and then being like, I don't know where you are. And then being like, oh, actually, I do know where you are. And then that happened repeatedly. So we ended up getting to a point where we didn't know where we were anymore. So we were lost, to give it a definition. And so we had to use we essentially had to figure out what our GPS coordinates were using it's called a DeLorme. So it's like one of those personal locator beacon things. Figured out where we were, found ourselves on a map using latitude and longitude. And then we had to follow a river into Lesotho, which is just like a state, I guess, of South Africa. And we ended up just having to hike into a random town. We didn't know what we were going to find there, but on our way into the town, we just kind of ran into some people who, like, for example, had like steel pipes that they were kind of threatening us with and things like that. So that would be both the coolest and the scariest trip I've been on. But it ended up being a really, really cool experience, and we stayed in one of the villages, and essentially, from what it was described to me, the man who was the mayor of the village, they referred to him as the chiefy king of the village, let us stay in his house, which also was scary at the time because we didn't know this person. We didn't honestly want to stay in a random person's house, but he was insisting that it would be safer than camping. So we were kind of made to stay in this random person's house. But overall, it ended up being a great learning experience, a very neat cultural experience, but would not recommend getting lost in South Africa and then hiking into a different country. Yep.
What are the most exotic animals you've seen?
That one's complicated because it was unrelated to my job. For the most exotic animal that I've seen while doing something job related was baboons, basically, which is another thing with South Africa, is that you're getting harassed by baboons a lot. But my grandma, who travels a lot, when I don't remember what the event was, but we went to Madagascar, which was really cool. And so I saw all of the animals that you would see in Madagascar. So like lemurs and all the fun lizards and stuff.
So, Meg, what kind of advice do you have for high schoolers who are getting ready to, or within the next few years, getting ready to think about a career? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what my advice is to really anyone, whether you're in high school or college or whatever, is to try to gain as many skills as you can in a variety of areas. So even if you're very, I'm trying to think, I can't even think of an area. Even if you're like very arts focused, for example, I think it's really important to also take some time to learn other hard skills as well. Because the more you can do, the larger the world is for you. And that's always been something that I have done. I just think it's really important to learn as many different things as you can, because you don't really know what you want until you've tried enough.
Awesome. Okay. Well, do we have any last minute questions? No? Okay. I just want to thank you so much for being one of the speakers in our speaker series. It was awesome to have you, and I think that it's a really different experience and different kind of career choice for people to hear about. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to pass them along to Bree or get a hold of me in some other way. She has my email address, so I'm always happy to help if you're looking to get into the industry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye. Thank you, Meg.
Bye, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.